Hey, it's Job. I just wanted to say thank you to everyone who has recently subscribed. We hit 1,000 subscribers recently, and I just wanted to express my thank you to everyone who has liked, commented, and shared these videos with others. I can't wait to share more videos with you all. But anyways, let's get started with this journal with me. As you all know, I love using different types of papers in my spreads, so I took out this vintage Japanese document that I used in an earlier journal with me, and I'm just going to cut out a piece to cover the top left-hand corner of the left page. Before taping that piece down, I felt like using a craft paper background for the left page, so I took some craft paper out and measured out enough paper to cover one page of the spread. But rather than taping both papers onto the journal, I tore a piece of the craft paper off so that when both the Japanese document paper and the craft paper are taped down, there would be a small gap, about a 1 centimeter gap, in between the two types of paper. This would allow some of the white journal paper to peek through, and I know it sounds a bit complicated right now, but if you watch what's happening on the screen, it should make a bit more sense. As usual, I'm going to use my Daiso tape runner to tape that all down. My camera died halfway through recording this clip, but basically, I just wrote out the word Thursday in block letters and put down some red grid washi near the center fold of the page. I didn't want that Japanese document paper to be covered by the date, so I put the rest of the date on the craft paper. Rather than using my brush pen to finish the date, I'm going to use my Recollections Alpha stamp set and stamp November 17. I used a red Versamagic ink, and as usual, I'm cleaning my stamps with a baby wipe like a good crafter. Anyways, after cleaning up my space, I pulled out 2 boxes of washi tapes. I know, I have a problem. And I picked out a few of them to put down on the bottom of the left page. Since I've committed to a brown and red theme for this page, I took out my favorite classic-y grid washi with the maroon grid lines and this red geometric washi from Muji, and I just placed them randomly on the bottom of the page. I wanted to use this pointing finger stamp from Cavallini in the spread, but since I didn't have any inks that stamp well onto washi tapes, I pulled out this gray post-it and decided to stamp that finger onto the post-it first and then tape that down on top of the washi tapes. Honestly, I think I could have stopped right there, but since I tend to overclutter my pages, I still wanted to add something to the left edge of the page, so I took out my Korean name stamp and stamped it multiple times on the edge of the page with an orange Versamagic ink. As usual, I took out my trusty baby wipes and cleaned that stamp down. This next part is a little weird and embarrassing, but basically, a month ago I bought these tissue boxes because they had awesome botanical illustrations on them. Long story short, I got them so when I've used up all the tissue, I can cut out all the illustrations on the tissue box and use them in my journal. Oh man, the struggle is so real. Anyways, let's just think of it as recycling. But honestly, you've probably noticed that I rarely use, or I haven't used scrapbook paper at all, or pre-cut or pre-made ephemera pieces all that much in my journal, since there's so much paper with cool designs on them in our everyday lives already. I highly encourage you to just use what you have rather than spending tons of money on special paper and die cuts. Since the cardboard was a little thick, I tried to peel as many layers off to thin down the box so it wouldn't add too much bulk onto the page. After all that peeling, I took out these Fiskars spring-loaded scissors, what a mouthful, and I'm gonna use this to fussy cut out one of the flower clusters from the tissue box. In real time, this probably took around 10 minutes or even longer, so I'm just gonna skip to the part where it's been all cut out to save you the trouble of watching me fumble around with those tiny scissors. After cutting out that flower cluster, which made my hands sore by the way, I wanted to adhere it onto the page, but I also wanted to layer it with this pale yellow post-it I had. I didn't want the flowers to be taped over top of the post-it, rather I wanted some of the leaves and the flowers to fall behind the post-it to look like the post-it was tangled or enveloped by the flowers. But before I could even commit to that, I taped down a scrap piece of craft paper to tie in the left page of the spread to the right page of the spread. I also put some gray washi at the top of the page before taking out my glue stick and putting a generous amount of glue on the flower cluster. As you know, I don't like using glue sticks, but for this occasion I thought it would be more logical since the flower clusters were quite delicate and there were parts of the cluster that were just too thin for the tape runner to glide over. Since I wanted some parts of the flower cluster to be positioned behind the post-it and some parts to fall over top of the post-it, I had to apply adhesive to both the flower cluster and the post-it before taping them down. This part was tricky because A, my hands were sticky from the glue, that's why I hate using glue, and B, I had to maneuver the position of the flower cluster and post-it before pressing it onto the page. Luckily, the glue takes a little bit longer to dry, so I had some time to reposition some of the leaves and flowers. After I was happy with the position, I went and washed my hands obviously, and then took out some Camel Garden stamps and my brown Versa Magic ink to work on the bottom right corner of that page. First, I dabbed the ink pad directly onto the page, and then I went in with the actual stamps. By doing so, I was adding a bit more color to that page, which was otherwise quite plain and white. Since the page still looked quite bare, I took out some airmail stamps and layered them onto the page as well. I also had these two tiny letterpress stamps that I got from Vancouver, and I just stamped my initials near the corner of the page. Before moving on, I obviously wiped down my stamps with a wet wipe. So we're almost done here. I just took out this brush pen, which is a lot thinner than the Tombow or Zig brush pens, and I just scripted out the date. However, I hated how it looked. I honestly don't mind how it looks now, but I guess at the time, I was really unhappy with it. So I peeled up the post-it and part of the flower cluster, which took so long to position earlier, so that I could redo the date. I taped down the same post-it, and just to play it safe this time, I'm going to use stamps rather than scripting out the date. I used this stamp set, this wooden stamp set, which has a Times New Roman type of font, and also my Recollections Alpha stamp set for the numbers. Now I'm just going to add a few final touches. I wanted to add a postage stamp onto the right page, and I ended up using this big brown stamp from Hong Kong, and I think it really ties that page all together. I then cut out a thin strip of that classic-y grid tape and taped it near the fold of the page. After, I realized that I didn't adhere that postage stamp yet, so I ended up taping it down with my trusty tape runner from Daiso. The spread is all finished. I usually turn the camera off before I start writing and journaling, but I totally forgot to do that this time. Overall, I think that the spread is a bit more toned down than my usual pages, but I loved how it turned out. The spread is muted, and there are a lot of vintage elements that reference Asia, such as the vintage Japanese document, the Hong Kong postage stamp from the 20s, and my Korean name stamp that I used. Anyways, thank you so much for watching, and as always, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. I still cannot believe we've reached 1,000 subscribers, and I can't express my gratitude enough. Stay tuned for a new video on Thursday, well, next Thursday, but for now, bye!